It's Dr. Long at Delro with an overview of the Forward into Battle game. It starts with a grounding in the engineering route study of the Republic of Georgia, so provided by the Corps of Engineers, and it gives all sorts of detailed information about the infrastructure. When you open this in Adobe PDF, there are all sorts of overlays you can toggle on or off, like you can turn on the distances between these little checkpoints or not, and identify bridges and roads and hydrology and all that jazz. So 30 or 40 different layers of complexity. You can zoom this in and retain a lot of fidelity because it's Adobe. So again, you can get very close. Like this one I have toggled on for bridges and so forth. So what we've done with this is take a look at the classification of terrain by category: flat, medium, rough, possible flood areas, and snow or ice. And now we've digitized this to turn this into a workable simulation. So let me go through that here now. So now our next step was to render that map and simplify it into a hex system that categorizes the terrain into four. Each hex is 10 kilometers from side to side. Now we've normalized and standardized the road network, so good roads, trails. We've simplified the rivers and towns. Black dotted line, the railroad, identified C-17 capable airfields. And so now we've rendered from the ports up to the international border here in Azerbaijan, and then deeper into Azerbaijan itself, so Georgia and Azerbaijan, up to Yevlak. So now we can associate movement points with each of these different categories of terrain so that we can standardize or normalize unit movements along the lines of communication. We're actually going to use this with the sustainers during the joint warfighting function technical training time so that we can work on more detailed concept of support and work on some time distance factors. For purposes of our RSOI game, we're going to simplify that even further, however, so that we can get a playable game that will allow us to visualize the most important decisions at the expense of fidelity. All right, so the next thing that I've done is that using the distances and normal rates of movement for wheeled vehicles and convoys as a general guide, I've identified certain nodes and then routes that roughly parallel the road structure, and each of these represents a simplification of one 8-hour movement segment as part of a 24-hour day. So what we've said is that in conjunction with the host nation, we're going to have access to the roads for 8 hours out of a 24-hour period so that they can do their own commercial activities, the movement of other units, maintenance, and some friction and fog of war. So each of these represents about 8 hours of movement. So you could, if you had 24 hours, you could probably move this in 1 day, 2 days, 2.5 days to get all the way down here. But this now represents a unit move for one 8-hour segment between these different nodes, and the ones going down the middle through the cleared terrain along the roads. You can see how this center path is a lot faster than the ones on the outside that are going through rougher terrain. So we've just we've lettered these nodes. We've said the units are going to arrive at ports A, B, and C. B is probably a J-Lots. This is Poti and Batumi. And the division's going to have to move down to assembly areas and assembly areas down here, and we're going to build a theater logistics support area here in S. So we're trying to move through these lines of communication here. Now, in order to make it easier to visualize the movement of units, the next step that I'm going to undertake will be to simply widen this lines of communications out. So now I have actually some room to make some playing pieces, so I'm not all clustered in and around. And then in step 4, I'm going to remove the terrain features from underneath, and so we're left with a logical transportation network diagram that's going to allow us to visualize the movement of units and fuel trucks and capabilities and enemy and friendly forces throughout the lines of communication, while retaining the basic logical structure of the terrain. This will just help us visualize on just those elements of JR, SO, and I that we care to visualize. So when you're designing these kinds of simulations or these logical constructs, you're always involved in a trade-off between fidelity and detailed information and the minimum amount you need in order to represent the problem at hand. This is all part of problem framing. And so we will use this as the playing map, arriving at ports A, B, and C, building divisional assembly areas in RV, WT, U, X, Y, and Z, and theater log base at S. So moving from left to right as in marching. Now you will recall from the Charlie 504 slide deck this very useful concept diagram that shows RSOI that's being supported by elements of the global strategic logistics network, and how deploying units move to aerial and sea ports of embarkation. They move by strategic movement into a theater. They arrive at A pods and S pods. They are received there. They stage their equipment, people, and supplies in a marshalling area and prepare for onward movement. They traverse the lines of communication up into the tactical area where there's a transfer of authority to a warfighter. So we're using by multimodal methods to get there, and then the final tactical road march or maneuver or movement into the warfighting area. And that's where integration has occurred. So you can see this one operation, JRSO and I, is how the operational level of war connects the strategic to the tactical in one seamless, we hope, but one process model that gets us from left to right. And you'll see this is the basic model of nodes and routes that we've represented in our forward into battle game. So at a simplified level then, forward into battle is an operational JRSO&I game where we have some road, rail, air transportation network represented by nodes and routes, moving in this case from west to east. And so units are going to RSO&I through that network, and we're going to build tactical assembly areas for the corps and divisional base and the brigade combat teams and supporting brigades, and a theater logistics support area which will contain all of the fuel and ammo and supplies required to sustain the combat forces during Phase 3. In our particular game, we're going to model the movement of a division represented by 40 different battalion-sized headquarters and maneuver units, each of which have their own fuel consumption. We're going to model sustainment through the use of fuel points. And so there are a number of forces on the blue. The Corps commander, who's going to be in charge of this gang. A Corps G3, who has a set of Blue Force enablers that can be employed throughout the area that will help shape the conditions for efficient and effective onward movement. In some cases, he can prioritize roads to get increased throughput, and he can array various defensive countermeasures that can counterattack the unseen but always felt red force that's trying to delay us. So the red force has the ability to attack nodes and TAAs, by air, with scuds, with raids, and soft forces. You can attack routes between the nodes with ambushes, IED, and chemical. For every red attack, there is a blue countermeasure that, if in the same node or along the same route, can help negate the effectiveness of that force. May be able to defeat it completely, but not always. It may simply just reduce the damage that could be taken. So the red is going to be deploying these capabilities based on their read of our progress through the locked-in, just try to slow us down. Now, it's hard to stop a U.S. Army division from doing what it wants to do, but you can make life more difficult through disruption, delay, and disinformation. So to counterattack that, or counteract that, the blue force is Corps Commander in charge. The G3 has assets that can be employed against the red. The Division G3 is going to plan and control the air and ground movement of divisional units from the seaports up into their TAAs. The Division G4 is going to be forecasting and prioritizing the fuel requirements and communicating that to the Expeditionary Sustainment Command, represented by 2 players. A distribution manager who's going to manage air and truck fleets to move fuel points throughout the lock, both to build up theater stockages in the LSA to support conventional ops in Phase 3, but also to provide fuel along the way that supports the movement of the division into TAA. So 2 different missions that distribution manager must manage. Support the forces it's moving, build up theater stocks inland. And then the ESC fuel manager, who's going to forecast and manage fuels at the nodes so that the distribution manager can implement the movement plan, the distribution plan that gets the fuel to the nodes and to the LSA as needed. So some coordination that has to happen in here, and some prioritization that's got to be normalized, and some trade-off decisions about how and where to move things and what to protect and what to make priorities of movement. And the idea is that red's going to gain victory points based on the ability to destroy fuel and to delay and disrupt units along the way. If they are successful, they may gain more capabilities because of information ops. Blue is going to earn victory points by rapidly moving to TAAs. The sooner you get there with each unit getting to its destination, the more victory points you'll gain. You can also gain victory points by defeating red force attacks. So we have something of an asymmetric fight here. Get used to that. You can't see the red pieces until their effects are felt, but they can see you moving through because you're so large and we have an open system. So what we're going to start with is the blue force has 10 ships available. Each ship has 10 slots. Inside each slot you can place one of the 40 divisional units. 3,000 points of fuel. Each point of fuel represents 1,000 gallons, so that's you can essentially put 3 million gallons of fuel in any one of those slots. You can place a capability that the G3 has, so each one of these capabilities, ADA, Tactical Combat Force, Civil Affairs Unit, MP Unit, EOD, Chemical, or a Movement Control Team, any of those can fit in one of these slots. You can have up to 10 of each of those, so you have some choices to make. And you can place truck companies. Now, the ESC is going to start with 30 truck companies that'll start off in the ports that we've contracted for. Each truck company can move one route each turn and carry 300 points of fuel, or the equivalent of 300,000 gallons. And you can bring more green suit truck companies if you so wish. So you have 100 total slots, 40 are taken up by the division. That leaves you 60 to mix between your capabilities, the wholesale fuel, and additional green truck companies. And so by getting your force mix right, you may be able to have more or less success. Now, once you load the ships, they're loaded, but you get to call them forward as you wish. Like you can say, hey, I want ship 5 next instead of ship 4. They will be offloaded in the order with which you loaded them. So if this ship arrives, it gets offloaded 1, 2, then 3, then 4, and Each port can offload one entire ship each turn, and now you can do less if you want, but then there will be in the port. Each turn represents one day, and so each of these routes between nodes can support the movement of 2 units and 2 truck companies each turn. So these are one's moving in an 8-hour segment, another one's moving in the second 8-hour segment. So you can put up to 2 units and 2 truck companies on each route. And that's a combination of both directions. So you could go all in one direction or half one way, then half the other way. If you make this a priority route through the use of applying a movement control team, you can increase that to 4 units and 4 truck companies. Now you can't stack those and you can't save those. So if you have capacity that you don't use, then it's gone. So you can't trade truck companies for units because of agreements with the host nation that we've constructed about how we will use those locks. More contained in the rules, which I'll review here in a minute. But that's the general concept. So you're going to have a team of Blue Force that collaborates and makes the daily plan to move units, fuel, and apply capabilities through in order to move the force and supplies into TAAs and the LSA. You'll have aerial movement capacity. You can move 1 unit and 400 points of fuel from any node to any other node to represent intra-theater air. But remember, Red may have a stinger that can shoot you down when you do that. So take that into account. It's a thinking enemy that learns from you as you go. I'll leave the rules for you to read. I'll just hit some highlights. Starts off with the purpose, to visualize the principles of JRSO and I, to visualize operational level deployment and distribution against a thinking enemy. The roles that the players will play, a referee, an Op4, and then 6 Blue Force. Blue loads 10 ships with units, capabilities, trucks, and fuel. They deploy through seaports, through the lock to TAAs to meet our op-plan requirements, using enablers to shape conditions, protect the force, and defeat Red attacks along the way. You want to be efficient in the use of that network. Red tries to slow you down. Ends at 20 turns, or when you have all your Blue 4 units in TAAs and 10 million gallons of fuel, in other words, 10,000 points of fuel in the LSA at S. So the 40 divisional units, these are all battalions or equivalents. These are the TAAs that they have to get to. Headquarters is going to S. All of the first ABCT, and these are the separate pieces. There's a headquarters, a recon squadron, 1A and 1B CAV, so we're using 2 combined arms battalions, field artillery battalion, engineer battalion, and support battalion going to U, 2nd Brigade going to X, 3rd Brigade going to, First, Second, and 3rd Brigade going to U, X, and Z. The Aviation Brigade consisting of a headquarters, Attack 1 and Attack 2 battalions, a lift battalion, and then the ground aviation support battalion all going to V. Maneuver Enhancement Brigade has a headquarters, an MP battalion, engineer battalion, 88. These are moving pieces. They're not permitted to engage in defense of the lock because they are moving. We're coordinating with the Corps for those other enablers, and ROE does not allow these guys to operate directly. The Fires Brigade has a headquarters, an MLRS battalion, and then 2 howitzer battalions. The Sustainment Brigade has a headquarters and then 4 CSSBs. Now, each of these CSSBs, the Aviation Support Battalion, and the 3 BSBs can all carry fuel with them. And we'll see that in a minute. Under capabilities, this describes the relationship. The red attacks that can attack nodes. The TAA is a node. And then the routes that connect these nodes. So for each red attack, there is a blue capability in addition. Blue has a movement control team that can double the road capacity of any one route to 4. The MCT is not counterattack or counteracting your red capability. It just increases the number of units and also fuel trucks that can move along the route. Each turn, the Core G3 and the Red Force are going to reset and reallocate their capabilities using a capability matrix. So that is going to be a free movement. You'll use a worksheet to allocate your resources against nodes or routes, and then that will shape part of the fight. Red will receive a fixed set of capabilities by turn that can be influenced by the outcome of battles. And then Blue, however, gets to choose a number and type of capabilities to field at the start of the game when loading ships, up to 10 of each type. If you have undeployed ships and you want to change those capabilities, you can do that, but it'll cost you 20 victory points to represent the cost of reloading ships. Only Red knows what they have. Fuel is how we're going to model the consumption and distribution of logistics. Each fuel point represents 1,000 gallons. The nodes all can store an unlimited amount of fuel. Each of the divisional units consumes a basic load of fuel each turn, and that's based on using Oplog Planner and the quick logistics estimation worksheet to get that correct proportionally. So these numbers are a bit simplified, but they are proportional and accurate. So each turn, every unit in the division is going to consume a basic load of fuel. The priority is to draw down the fuel from the node they are in, if it has fuel. Failing that, from a support battalion that's in the node with them, and failing that, their basic load. If they use their basic load, they can't move again until that basic load has been reconstituted. You lose victory points, Blue, if you aren't using the node. If you have to use your tactical fuel supplies, then that violates the principle of JRSO and I that says that you should just move through and that the theater should support you. Now, the ESC is going to move the fuel points between the nodes using fuel truck companies. All the units start with a basic load of fuel on board, including the support battalions, which have all of their fuel available when they offload. The support battalions, as maneuver units themselves, consume fuel, but they can also carry. So you'll see on the unit playing piece, one CSSB is rated at 5/500. That means every turn they're going to consume 5 fuel points, and they're also carrying 500 fuel points. These are the daily consumption figures of the divisional units. The division, if it were all in the theater and engaged, would be burning 705 fuel points each turn. The fuel is going to be represented by poker chips. Fuel truck companies are represented by pawns. So if it's sitting on top of the poker chips, that's what it's carrying. If it's empty, then it's just the pawn moving. You use those fuel truck companies to move fuel between the nodes. You have truck companies and CSSBs that can also do that. Truck companies can carry up to 500 fuel points each, as can the CSSBs. Truck companies cannot be split. And you will start with the ESC with 10 commercial truck companies. Each can carry 500 fuel points sitting in the ports. You can get up to an additional 20 Blue Force truck companies based on the Corps Commander's approval. The ports can offload a ship a day. Intra-theater air can move one unit from one node to any other node. I should also say I can also move 400 fuel points. So we've negotiated with the host nation about the use of that transportation network, and it'll be strictly enforced. A route is the network connecting two nodes, so route AB connects node A and node B. Two things can move down the routes: divisional units and ESC truck companies, and they're moved separately in 2 different time slots per coordination with the host nation. Each route can support the movement of 2 units and 2 truck companies per turn, and that's a combination of one or both directions. If I use a movement control team, then that route becomes a priority route, and now I can move 4 and 4. You can use up to 1 MCT per route, and to bring an MCT into theater takes up one of those slots of your 100 in the on the ships. If you're moving along a route, as a unit, a divisional unit, and it's successfully disrupted, for example, by chemical or IED or an ambush, you might be asked to return to the node of origin. But consulting the combat results table, the referee will tell you how that outcome occurs. Now, along the routes, the enemy Red Force can use chemicals and IEDs. The countermeasure for that is EOD for IED and the CBRNE capability to neutralize chemicals. You place those in nodes, and then any route that is affected by one of those attacks can be neutralized. Your recon battalions may move 2 routes each turn. They can move twice as fast. Otherwise, ground units can only move 1 route per turn from one node to another node. In the order of movement, or the order for each turn is a day. There will be a preparation phase where red and blue are preparing their plans. Then blue will offload any ships and then move units and truck companies onto the routes that they propose to move down. We will then resolve the route attacks with ambushes, IEDs, and chemical, record the results, and apply the results. Blue then completes the move to the nodes where it was successful, where it gets bumped back. So you always end the movement phase in a node. And then we conduct the nodal attacks and apply and record the results. Then blue will conduct aerial resupply. If red can and wants to try to shoot it down, we resolve that. You then move aerial movement of a unit, and red may or may not be able to interdict. And then we get into the consumption phase where, based on the tenants inside each node, we'll draw down the node's fuel supplies first. Then, if there's not enough fuel, we'll draw it from any support battalion that happens to be there. Otherwise, the unit will consume its basic load and then not be able to move until that's reestablished. So blue is going to lose victory points if they have to draw supplies from a support battalion. A support ballation. Sorry about that. If you culminate, that means that you had to use your own fuel. You lose even more. If there was a successful nodal or route attack that caused a unit to be damaged and requires constitution, they will be moved immediately back to the port, have to be reconstituted by expending fuel, and then lose 20 victory points. If you had to draw supplies from a support battalion, minus 10. If you have core capabilities that you forgot to employ, that's minus 10. And then you get victory points based on how quickly you get their units into their final TAA. If you can move there on the first turn, say by air, you get 40 minus 1. You would have 39 points for that unit, and then so on. Each turn, you lose 1 victory point for not having that unit in its final destination. So that will be your total number of victory points sorted out by that. We will compare blue against blue because we're going to run 2 iterations of this game. And then red gets a victory point for every point of fuel destroyed, and 5 for each successful attack, by which we mean a capability inflicted damage on a blue force. Blue is constrained that your reconnaissance battalions must be the first unit of that brigade to clear a assembly area for the BCTs. Aviation battalions, the 2 attack and the lift, can fly to a node that has a maneuver unit in it. They've cleared it. The blue has to get, in order to succeed or to end the game before turn 20, you got to get all the divisional units into their assembly areas, and the ESC has to get 10,000 fuel points in Node S. The maximum amount of fuel blue has available for choosing what to fill up to 100 slots with is 50,000 fuel. You can put you have 7 capabilities to choose from. You can have a maximum of 10 of each, and you can ask for an additional up to 20 fuel trucks. So at the start, blue has 10 ships. Each ship has 10 slots. Each slot can load a unit, a truck company, a capability, or 3,000 fuel points. Again, they all take up 1 slot each. You'll load the division into 10 ships. That should, sorry. Said this a number of times. You call your ships forward to arrive into the ports. The order that you've loaded the ships is how they offload. And anything you can change the sequence of ships arriving, but not the order of units and fuel that are inside those ships. And that's our game, and we'll run a practice turn at the start to show how this works. And looking forward to the insights that come from this. And it's game on.